It was one of those afternoons that felt unhurried. Golden light stretched across Main Street. Storefront windows reflected the soft glow of the sun. The town moved at its usual gentle rhythm. A breeze drifted through open car windows, warm and steady. Inside a black and white patrol cruiser, Officer Daniel Reeves rested his arm near the door, fingers tapping lightly against the frame. Beside him, Officer Mateo Collins watched the sidewalks pass by. No emergency calls. No raised voices. Just the quiet hum of tires against pavement. Daniel gave a small smile. "Days like this," he said, "make the job feel simple." Mateo nodded. "Yeah, peaceful's underrated." They passed the bakery, the scent of fresh bread briefly filling the car. A couple crossed the street hand in hand. An elderly man tipped his hat as they rolled by. Normal. Comforting. Predictable. And then Mateo leaned forward slightly. "Hey, you see that?" Up ahead, between two slow-moving cars, a golden-colored dog stepped carefully into the road. Not sprinting. Not frantic. Measured. Daniel eased his foot off the accelerator. The dog paused mid-lane, glanced toward the patrol car, then continued forward. There was no panic in his body. No trembling. His tail wasn't tucked. His ears weren't pinned back. He moved with quiet intention. "That's not random," Mateo murmured. The dog crossed safely to the other side of the street. Then he stopped. And looked back. Directly at them. For a moment, everything felt still. Not because of danger. But because of the way he looked at them. Focused. Expectant. Daniel felt it settle in his chest. "He's checking if we're watching," he said softly. The dog turned again and trotted forward, not away, but ahead. A few steps. Then another pause. Another look back. Cars slowed naturally around him. Drivers seemed more curious than irritated. Daniel flipped on the cruiser's lights. No sirens. Just soft flashing blues and reds reflecting off shop windows. The dog's ears twitched at the color. He didn't run. He simply continued forward. "He wants us to follow," Mateo said. Daniel nodded once. "All right then, let's follow." They kept a respectful distance. Not chasing. Not pushing. Just moving behind him at a calm, controlled pace. The streets began to shift. The busy storefronts slowly gave way to older homes. Large oak trees lined the sidewalks, their branches stretching overhead like protective arms. Sunlight filtered through leaves in golden patterns. The dog slowed slightly as they entered the quieter neighborhood. He looked back again. Always checking. Always certain. Daniel felt something strange but gentle growing inside him. This wasn't about a loose pet. This felt deliberate. The dog crossed another small intersection and continued toward the far end of town. People began noticing. A woman stepped out of her front yard, shading her eyes. Two kids on bicycles stopped pedaling, watching the patrol car trail behind the golden figure. No one seemed alarmed. Just curious. The dog reached the final bend in the road. Beyond it sat a small park, one that had been part of the town for decades. Not crowded anymore. But not forgotten either. Daniel slowed the cruiser. The dog stepped onto the grass. Soft. Green. Sun-warmed. He walked straight toward a wooden bench beneath a white oak tree. And then he stopped. The patrol car rolled to a gentle halt along the curb. Engine off. Silence settled around them. Daniel and Mateo stepped out slowly. The air carried the faint scent of cut grass. Leaves rustled overhead. The dog remained still beside the bench. Sitting tall. Calm. watching something unseen in the distance. Daniel approached carefully. "Hey there, buddy," he said quietly. The dog turned his head slightly. His eyes were deep brown. Clear. Steady. There was something almost human in the way he held their gaze. Mateo walked toward the bench and brushed his fingers along the wooden backrest. There was a small metal plaque attached. Faded by time. Daniel noticed the dog's movement. He stood now. Not anxious. Just attentive. The dog placed one paw gently against the bench. Then looked up at them. Daniel felt the moment shift. Not heavy. But meaningful. He stepped closer to read the engraving. The letters were worn, but visible. In loving memory of. He paused. Mateo leaned in. The name etched there belonged to a former officer of their department. A man who had served the town for decades. A man who had passed away the previous year. Daniel swallowed slowly. The dog lowered himself back down beside the bench. Peaceful. As if he had arrived exactly where he meant to be. "You think," Mateo began quietly. Daniel nodded before he finished. This was his partner. They both remembered. The retired officer had once spoken often about his golden retriever. About how they walked this very park after shifts. About how the bench had been dedicated after his passing. The dog wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He wasn't wandering. He had come here with purpose. And somehow, he had wanted them to witness it. The sunlight dipped slightly lower in the sky, casting warm amber light over the scene. Daniel crouched beside the dog. The golden retriever looked at him once more. Calm. Connected. As if saying, "Now you understand." Daniel placed a gentle hand on the dog's shoulder. "You wanted someone to remember," he whispered. The dog's tail moved slowly across the grass. One soft sweep. No barking. No demand. Just presence. Mateo exhaled quietly. "He led us here," he said. "Not to save someone, not to escape." Daniel nodded. "But to honor someone." The oak leaves swayed gently overhead. The small park felt different now. Full. The dog rested beside the bench, eyes half closed in the warm light. And Daniel realized something simple. Some bonds don't end. They just wait to be seen. And what this dog had carried in his heart was only the beginning of a story the entire town had yet to remember. The park felt different now. Not empty. Not forgotten. Just waiting. Daniel remained crouched beside the golden retriever, his hand resting gently against the dog's shoulder. The fur was warm from the sun. Steady breathing. Calm heartbeat. Mateo stood near the bench, reading the plaque once more. The name seemed heavier now. Officer Harold Bennett. A man who had worn the same uniform. Driven the same streets. Sat in the same patrol car years ago. Daniel looked at the dog again. "You were his, weren't you?" he asked softly. The dog's ears lifted slightly at the sound of Daniel's voice. Not startled. Just aware. His eyes held that same quiet focus. Not confusion. Not fear. Purpose. Mateo stepped closer. "I remember him talking about this park," he said. After every shift, he'd walk his dog here before heading home. Daniel nodded slowly. The pieces were beginning to settle into place. The careful crossing through traffic. The constant looking back. The patient pauses. This dog hadn't been wandering aimlessly. He had been guiding them. Not urgently. Not dramatically. Just with quiet certainty. The golden retriever stood and walked once around the bench. Slow steps. Measured. He stopped near the base of the oak tree and sniffed the ground gently, as if recognizing something familiar. Then he returned to the bench. And sat again. Daniel felt a tightening in his chest. "How long do you think he's been coming here alone?" he asked quietly. Mateo shrugged lightly. "Maybe since, you know." They didn't need to say it out loud. Since Harold passed. The dog's gaze drifted toward the path leading into the park. For a moment, it almost looked like he expected someone to appear there. Someone he had once walked beside. The wind shifted softly. Leaves rustled overhead like a whisper. Daniel stood and removed his sunglasses, hooking them into his shirt collar. "He ran through traffic to bring us here," Daniel said. Mateo gave a faint smile. "Not to cause trouble." Daniel nodded. "To share something." A woman pushing a stroller slowed as she passed by the park entrance. She noticed the patrol car, then the officers, then the dog beside the bench. She paused. "Is everything okay?" she called gently. Daniel turned with a reassuring smile. "Everything's fine, ma'am." She looked at the dog, her expression softening. "Oh," she said quietly. "That's Mr. Bennett's dog, isn't it?" Mateo exchanged a look with Daniel. "You know him?" Mateo asked. "Of course," she replied. "They used to walk here every evening. Rain or shine." Her voice carried a hint of nostalgia. "He still comes," she added softly. "Almost every day." Daniel looked back at the dog. Still sitting. Still facing forward. Loyal. Waiting. The woman gave a small nod and continued down the sidewalk, pushing the stroller gently ahead. Silence returned to the park. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just reflective. Daniel stepped closer to the bench and ran his fingers lightly along the engraved letters. In loving memory. He felt something settle deep inside him. This wasn't a rescue. It wasn't an emergency. It was remembrance. The dog suddenly stood again. He looked at Daniel. Then at Mateo. Then back toward the entrance of the park. One small step forward. Then he stopped. Waiting. Daniel understood. "You want us to walk?" he asked quietly. The dog's tail moved once. Slow and hopeful. Mateo smiled faintly. "Well, we're here." Daniel nodded. "Let's walk." They began moving down the park path at an easy pace. The golden retriever walked between them. Not pulling. Not lagging. Just steady. Every few steps, he would glance upward, as if making sure they were still beside him. Daniel felt an unexpected warmth rise in his chest. This wasn't about replacing someone. It wasn't about moving on. It was about continuing something. Halfway down the path, the dog slowed near a patch of sunlight breaking through the trees. He paused there briefly. Closed his eyes. As if remembering. Daniel swallowed gently. "He's still walking his route," Mateo whispered. Daniel nodded. And maybe, he just didn't want to walk it alone. The dog resumed forward motion, tail swaying gently. The afternoon sun dipped slightly lower, casting long golden shadows along the path. And as they walked together, two officers and a loyal dog, something quiet but powerful began to form. Not just memory. Not just loyalty. But connection. And somewhere in the stillness of that park, Daniel realized. This story wasn't over. It was only beginning. They walked the full length of the park path. Slowly. No rush. The gravel crunched softly beneath their boots. The golden retriever kept a steady pace between them, his fur glowing under the late afternoon light. Every so often, he would drift slightly ahead, then glance back. Always checking. Always making sure they were still there. Daniel felt something subtle shift inside him. This no longer felt like curiosity. It felt like responsibility. At the end of the path, the dog paused near a small wooden footbridge that crossed a shallow stream. The water moved lazily beneath it, catching flecks of sunlight. The dog stepped onto the bridge. Stopped halfway. Turned. Looked at them. Mateo smiled faintly. He's waiting again. Daniel nodded. Yeah, but this time it feels different. They stepped onto the bridge beside him. The wood creaked gently under their combined weight. The dog stood very still there. Head slightly lowered. Ears relaxed. Daniel rested his hands on the railing and looked out over the water. This must have been part of their routine, he said quietly. Mateo leaned against the opposite side. I remember Harold mentioning this bridge once. Said it was his favorite spot to think. The dog moved closer to Daniel's side. Not pressing. Just near. As if aligning himself with the memory. For a moment, no one spoke. The air carried the scent of damp earth and leaves. Peaceful. Grounded. Daniel felt it clearly now. This dog hadn't just led them here to show a place. He had brought them to continue something. To witness it. To walk it. After a few seconds, the golden retriever turned and stepped off the bridge. He didn't head back toward the bench. Instead, he took a different path, one that curved gently around the far edge of the park. Mateo raised an eyebrow. New direction. Daniel gave a quiet breath. He's not finished. They followed again. Not because they felt obligated, but because it felt right. The path narrowed slightly as it curved behind a line of tall hedges. Fewer people walked this part of the park. It felt more private. More personal. The dog slowed near a small open clearing. There, beneath a young maple tree, sat something simple. A worn tennis ball. Faded. Weathered by time. The golden retriever approached it gently. Lowered his head. And nudged it forward once with his nose. Daniel's chest tightened. Mateo let out a soft exhale. No way. Daniel crouched slowly. You used to play here, he murmured. The dog picked up the tennis ball carefully. Not with excitement. Not with the frantic energy of a young pup. But with tenderness. He carried it a few steps, then placed it at Daniel's feet. And sat. Daniel looked at the ball. Then at the dog. Then back at Mateo. He's inviting us. Mateo gave a small nod. Or including us. Daniel picked up the tennis ball. It felt light in his palm. Worn smooth. He looked at the dog. You sure? He asked quietly. The golden retriever's tail brushed against the grass once. Twice. Soft anticipation. Daniel stood and tossed the ball gently, not far, just a short arc across the clearing. The dog ran after it. Not wildly, but with a burst of quiet joy. He retrieved it quickly and returned, placing it once again at Daniel's feet. And in that moment, the air shifted. Not heavy. Not sad. But full. As if something unfinished had just found motion again. Mateo smiled, shaking his head slightly. He didn't just want us to remember. Daniel nodded slowly. He wanted us to participate. They played like that for several minutes. Short tosses. Easy returns. No big gestures. Just small, steady exchanges. The golden retriever's movements carried a different energy now. Still calm. But lighter. as if sharing this space, this ritual, mattered deeply. Eventually, the dog slowed. He carried the ball back one final time and rested it against the base of the maple tree. Then he walked back toward the officers, sat between them, and looked up. Daniel felt it clearly. The dog had led them through the park for a reason. Not just to show where he had been, but to show who he still was. Loyal. Connected. Ready to continue walking if someone was willing. Daniel looked at Mateo. "We can't just leave him here." Mateo shook his head. "No, we can't." The sun dipped lower, casting a warm amber glow across the clearing. The dog leaned gently against Daniel's leg. Trusting. Steady. And for the first time since the afternoon began, Daniel understood. Following the dog had only been the first step. Now, it was their turn to decide what came next. The walk back through the park felt different. Quieter. But fuller. The golden retriever moved at an easy pace beside them, no longer checking over his shoulder every few steps. He didn't need to. They were with him now. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the grass. The air carried that early evening calm, the kind that makes everything feel softer. As they approached the bench again, a few more townspeople had gathered nearby. Not in a crowd. Just small clusters. A man walking his beagle. An elderly couple sitting at a picnic table. The woman with the stroller had returned, standing near the oak tree. They were all looking at the same thing. The dog. Daniel felt it, the quiet ripple spreading through the park. Mateo gave a small nod toward the onlookers. Word travels fast in a town like this. Daniel smiled faintly. Especially when it involves Harold. The golden retriever walked straight back to the bench and sat beside it again. Same posture. Same stillness. But now, he seemed calmer. Less like he was searching. More like he was sharing. The elderly man stepped forward slowly. "That's Bennett's boy," he said gently. "Name's Scout." Daniel turned toward him. "Scout," he repeated softly. The dog's ears lifted at the sound of his name. His tail moved once against the grass. Recognition. The man nodded. Harold raised him from a pup. Brought him everywhere. He paused, eyes warming with memory. After Harold passed. Scout kept coming here. Mateo crossed his arms loosely. "Every day?" "Just about," the man replied. "Same time." "Like clockwork." Daniel looked down at Scout. So today was no different. The man shook his head. "Maybe a little different. He's never brought the whole police department with him before." A few quiet chuckles passed through the small group. Soft. Affectionate. Scout remained seated. Calm in the center of it all. The woman with the stroller stepped closer. "He used to sit on that bench while Harold talked to people," she said. "Kids would pet him. Tourists would take pictures." She smiled faintly. It felt like he was part of the town. Daniel felt that word settle. Part. Scout wasn't just a dog who belonged to someone. He belonged here. A teenage boy approached hesitantly. "Is he okay?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "He's okay." The boy crouched a few feet away and extended a hand carefully. Scout sniffed it once, then allowed a gentle scratch behind his ear. The boy grinned. "He's still friendly." Mateo smiled. "Doesn't seem like that's changed." The oak leaves rustled overhead again. The light filtering through them had shifted from gold to amber. Evening was beginning to settle. Daniel looked around at the small gathering. Different ages. Different lives. All connected by the same quiet presence. Scout stood slowly and walked toward the elderly couple at the picnic table. He paused beside them. The woman reached down and brushed her fingers through his fur. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. Scout leaned gently into her touch. Not needy. Not restless. Just present. Daniel watched the way people softened around him. Shoulders lowering. Voices gentler. Smiles appearing. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was real. Mateo stepped closer to Daniel. "He didn't just lead us here," he said quietly. Daniel nodded. "He reminded everyone." Scout made his way back toward the bench one last time. He sat beside it, lifted his head slightly, and looked out across the park. The small crowd seemed to understand without words. This wasn't about sadness. It wasn't about loss. It was about continuity. A legacy still walking on four steady legs. Daniel stepped forward. He cleared his throat gently, not to command attention, just to speak. "Harold served this town for over 30 years, he said. "And it looks like Scout's still serving, in his own way." A few nods. A few quiet murmurs of agreement. The teenage boy spoke up again. "He shouldn't have to sit here alone." Daniel looked at Mateo. Mateo met his eyes. There was no debate in that look. Just understanding. The sun dipped lower, brushing the sky with soft orange and rose. Scout rose to his feet and walked over to Daniel once more. He sat at his side. Close. Daniel rested a hand gently on his back. Warm fur beneath his palm. Steady breathing. A steady presence. The town wasn't just noticing anymore. It was remembering. And as evening settled around the oak tree and the old wooden bench, something quiet but powerful became clear. Scout had brought them here not just to honor the past, but to decide the future. The small gathering slowly thinned as evening settled in. One by one, neighbors drifted home. Soft goodbyes. Gentle smiles. A few last pats on Scout's back. The sky shifted into deeper shades of orange and lavender. Streetlights along the park path flickered on. Daniel remained near the bench. Scout sat beside him, posture relaxed now, but still attentive. Mateo checked his watch. "We're technically still on shift," he said lightly. Daniel gave a quiet half-smile. "Doesn't feel like it." Scout stood and walked toward the bench again. This time, instead of sitting beside it, he jumped up carefully. He turned once in a small circle, then settled onto the wooden slats. Right in the center. As if he had done it 100 times before. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "That's where Harold used to sit," Mateo said softly. Daniel nodded. And Scout would sit next to him. The bench creaked gently under Scout's weight. The oak branches above swayed in the cooling breeze. The world felt slower now. More reflective. Daniel stepped closer and sat on the far end of the bench, leaving space between them. Scout glanced at him briefly. Then rested his head forward, facing the park. The space between them didn't feel empty. It felt respectful. Mateo leaned against the oak tree. "You ever think about what happens after someone's gone?" he asked quietly. Daniel considered that. "Sometimes," he admitted. Mateo nodded toward Scout. "I think he never stopped thinking about it." Scout shifted slightly. Not restless. Just aware of the voices. Daniel looked down at the worn wooden seat beneath his hands. Faint scratches. Small grooves carved by years of use. This wasn't just a memorial. It was a living place. Footsteps sounded along the path again. Slow. Measured. An older woman approached, holding a small bouquet of white daisies. She paused when she saw the officers. Then her eyes softened at the sight of Scout. "Oh," she breathed. "You're here again." Scout lifted his head gently at her voice. His tail thumped once against the bench. She stepped closer. "I come every Thursday," she explained quietly. "I used to bring these for Harold." She placed the daisies carefully beneath the plaque, then reached up to brush Scout's cheek. "You still keeping watch?" she whispered. Scout leaned into her hand for a moment. Daniel felt something steady and grounding settle over the scene. This wasn't about grief. It was about continuity. The woman straightened slowly. "I always wondered if he understood," she said, looking at Daniel. Daniel met her gaze. "I think he understands more than we do." She smiled gently at that, then walked back down the path. Silence returned. The air now carried a faint coolness. Scout shifted closer to Daniel on the bench. Not climbing into his lap. Not demanding anything. Just closing the distance. Daniel rested his hand on Scout's back again. "You don't want to leave this place behind," he said softly. Scout blinked slowly. Calm. Present. Mateo pushed off from the oak tree and approached. "We should probably call it in," he said quietly. "Let dispatch know we've located him." Daniel nodded. "But located doesn't feel like the right word." Mateo smiled faintly. "No, it doesn't." Scout slowly climbed down from the bench. He walked a few steps toward the park entrance. Then stopped. Looked back at Daniel. Not urgently. Just expectantly. Daniel stood. "You're not done yet, are you?" Scout held his gaze. Steady. Certain. The sky above had deepened into a soft indigo. First stars beginning to appear. The streetlights cast warm pools of light along the pathway. Mateo looked at Daniel. "What are you thinking?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "I'm thinking this park is only part of it." Scout turned toward the path leading out of the park. One step forward. Then another pause. He wasn't wandering. He was guiding. Again. Daniel glanced once more at the bench. At the plaque. At the daisies resting beneath it. "This place holds memory," he said quietly. Mateo nodded. "But memory doesn't stay in one spot." Scout began walking toward the park exit. Slow. Confident. Daniel followed. Not because he felt obligated, but because something inside him said, "There's more." As they stepped beyond the oak tree's shadow and onto the sidewalk, Daniel looked down at Scout. "You brought us to where he used to sit," he murmured. Scout walked calmly at his side. "And now," Daniel added softly, "you're taking us somewhere else." The night air wrapped gently around them. The town lights flickered warmly in the distance. And as Scout led them beyond the park gates, one quiet truth became clear. The edge of memory was only the beginning. The sidewalk outside the park felt quieter. Even the town seemed to lower its voice as night settled in. Streetlights cast warm circles of light onto the pavement. Windows glowed softly in nearby houses. Scout walked with steady purpose. Not pulling ahead. Not wandering off. Just leading, step by step. Daniel and Mateo followed a few paces behind. No rush. No urgency. Just quiet trust. "He's not going home," Mateo observed softly. Daniel shook his head. "No, this feels intentional." Scout turned down a side street lined with older brick buildings. Some of them closed for the night. Others still lit inside, a diner here, a corner store there. Daniel felt something familiar about the direction. A memory brushing the edge of recognition. The dog slowed near a building with large front windows and a faded wooden sign overhead. The Bennett hardware store. Daniel stopped walking. Mateo exhaled quietly. Harold's family business, he said. The store lights were dim inside, but not off. A single lamp glowed near the counter. Scout approached the front door, sat down, and waited. Daniel felt the weight of it settle. He used to stop here after shifts, Daniel said slowly. Help his brother close up. Mateo nodded. I remember that. Scout remained seated at the entrance. Calm. Expectant. The door opened gently from inside. A middle-aged man stepped out, flipping the sign from open to closed. He froze when he saw the patrol car. Then his eyes moved downward. To Scout. His expression changed instantly. Softened. Hey there, boy, he said quietly. Scout stood and walked toward him. Not jumping. Not barking. Just moving close enough to rest his head briefly against the man's side. The man placed a hand on Scout's back. You've been at the park again? He asked softly. Daniel stepped forward. Sir, are you Mr. Bennett? The man nodded. Thomas Bennett. He glanced at the officers. Is everything all right? Daniel gave a small, reassuring smile. Everything's fine. Scout led us here. Thomas looked down at the dog. He does that sometimes, he said. Walks the old routes. Mateo tilted his head slightly. Routes? Thomas nodded. Park first. Then here. Same order Harold used to follow. Daniel felt something warm move through him. Scout hadn't just been remembering. He had been retracing. Thomas crouched down in front of Scout. You still checking in on me, huh? He whispered. Scout's tail brushed gently against the sidewalk. Thomas looked up at the officers. After my brother passed, Scout stayed with me. But he never changed his routine. Daniel swallowed softly. He ran through traffic earlier, Daniel said. Thomas's brow furrowed slightly. He what? Not recklessly, Mateo clarified. Carefully. Like he wanted to make sure we followed. Thomas looked back at Scout. Then down the quiet street. I think, he said slowly, he just didn't want to walk it alone today. The words lingered in the air. Daniel glanced at the hardware store window. Inside, old photographs lined the wall behind the counter. Black and white images. Uniforms. Community events. And one large framed photo near the center. Harold Bennett. Standing proudly in uniform. Scout sitting beside him. Younger then. Bright-eyed. Thomas noticed Daniel looking. He insisted on that photo, Thomas said softly. Said they were partners. Scout stepped toward the window. Sat down in front of it. Facing the photograph. The glow from the lamp inside illuminated his outline. Golden fur edged in warm light. Daniel felt his throat tighten slightly. He remembers, Daniel said. Thomas nodded. He always has. For a moment, no one spoke. The town felt still. Wrapped in evening calm. Thomas stood slowly. I usually walk him home from here, he said. Daniel exchanged a glance with Mateo. We'd like to join you, Daniel said. Thomas gave a faint smile. I think he'd like that. Scout rose at the sound of movement. He stepped between them again. Familiar position. Comfortable. Ready. As they began walking down the quiet street together, Daniel realized something deeper. Scout wasn't just honoring the past. He was connecting it. Park. Store. family, community, one path at a time. And tonight, he had invited them into it. The patrol lights were off now. No flashing. No noise. Just 4 figures walking under warm streetlights. And in the reflection of the hardware store window behind them, the framed photo remained glowing softly. A reminder that some partnerships never truly end. They simply continue. In quieter ways. They walked slowly beneath the streetlights. Thomas on one side. Daniel and Mateo just behind. Scout moving gently between them. The town felt different at night. Quieter. More reflective. Porch lights glowed softly along the sidewalks. Crickets hummed somewhere in the distance. Thomas kept one hand loosely near Scout's collar, not holding, just present. He started this routine the week after Harold passed, Thomas said quietly. Park first. Then the store. Then home. Daniel listened closely. Every day? He asked. Every single day, Thomas replied. Scout glanced up briefly at Thomas's voice. Then forward again. Steady. Mateo looked ahead at the quiet residential street. That's not just habit, he said softly. That's loyalty. Thomas gave a faint nod. Harold used to say dogs don't just memorize paths, they memorize moments. The words lingered. Memorize moments. They reached a modest white house at the end of the block. A porch light burned warmly above the front door. Thomas paused at the gate. Scout stopped beside him. Daniel noticed something. The house wasn't silent. Inside the front window, a soft glow illuminated a small table. And on that table, a folded American flag. Framed. Beside it, another photo of Harold in uniform. Thomas opened the gate slowly. Scout walked in first. Then turned around and sat near the porch steps. Waiting. Daniel stepped closer. He stops here too? He asked. Thomas smiled gently. This is where Harold used to kneel down after every shift, right there by the steps. He pointed to a small worn patch in the grass. Scout would run to him before he even got out of the car. Scout walked to that exact spot, lowered himself onto the grass, and rested his head gently between his paws. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Not from sadness, but from understanding. He's not just remembering places, Daniel said quietly. Thomas nodded. He's keeping the routine alive. Mateo looked down at Scout. Why lead us into it? Thomas thought about that for a moment. Maybe, he said slowly, because he sees the uniform. Daniel glanced at his sleeve. At the badge catching the porch light. Scout lifted his head and looked directly at Daniel. Eyes steady. Familiar. Daniel felt it clearly now. Scout wasn't just honoring Harold. He was recognizing continuity. The uniform. The patrol car. The rhythm of service. To Scout, Daniel and Mateo weren't strangers. They were part of the same story. Thomas leaned against the porch railing. Harold believed this town was one big family, he said. He said being an officer wasn't about authority, it was about presence. Daniel nodded slowly. Showing up. Thomas smiled faintly. Exactly. Scout stood and walked over to Daniel. He paused, then gently leaned his side against Daniel's leg. Not replacing. Not forgetting. Just connecting. Daniel placed his hand on Scout's back. Warm fur under steady fingers. You didn't want the route to fade, Daniel murmured. Scout's tail brushed softly against the porch steps. Mateo exhaled quietly. The whole town saw him at the park tonight, he said. They remembered. Thomas looked out toward the quiet street. That's what Harold would have wanted. A small breeze passed through the trees, carrying the scent of evening air. Scout stepped back slightly and looked between all three men, as if checking one final time. The route was complete. The park. The store. Home. Daniel felt something settle deep inside him. This wasn't about grief. It wasn't about loss. It was about continuity. About how service doesn't end with one person. It moves forward. Through others. Through memory. Through quiet acts of loyalty. Thomas knelt and scratched behind Scout's ears. "You did good today," he whispered. Scout blinked slowly. Content. Daniel stepped back toward the gate. "We'll stop by tomorrow," he said gently. "Walk with him." Thomas smiled. "I think he'd like that." Scout looked at Daniel once more. Eyes calm. Certain. The truth had revealed itself now. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just steady. Scout hadn't led them through traffic to solve a mystery. He had led them to continue a legacy. And in doing so, he had reminded the town that bonds don't disappear. They evolve. And sometimes, they simply wait for someone willing to walk the path again. The next morning, the town felt lighter. Sunlight spilled across the streets. Birds called softly from the trees. Scout waited at the park entrance, tail sweeping gently over the grass. Daniel and Mateo arrived quietly, badges tucked under warm jackets. Scout lifted his head as soon as he saw them. No rush. No urgency. Just steady anticipation. "Morning, boy," Daniel said softly. Scout's ears twitched. He trotted a few steps, then looked back, inviting them to follow. The three walked the familiar path together. Bench beneath the oak. Sunlight through leaves. The small clearing where the tennis ball rested. Each step held meaning. Neighbors began noticing again. A few waved. Some smiled knowingly. Scout had become a symbol now, not just of memory, but of presence, loyalty, and continuity. Thomas appeared, holding a small thermos of coffee. "Thought you might want some," he said, smiling gently. Scout nudged his hand, then turned toward Daniel and Mateo, prompting them to continue. Daniel picked up the worn tennis ball. He tossed it lightly. Scout retrieved it and returned, placing it softly at Daniel's feet. Small acts. Quiet rituals. Moments that bridge the past and present. Mateo knelt beside Scout, brushing his golden fur. "You know," he said quietly, "this dog's teaching all of us something important." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, that love, loyalty, and memory don't end. They just move forward, through those who remember, and those willing to walk with it." Scout paused near the bench. He looked toward the oak tree, then at the officers. Then toward Thomas. A silent invitation. A reminder. Daniel and Mateo sat beside him, letting the warmth of the morning sun settle over them. Scout rested his head gently on Daniel's knee. The town moved around them, but in this small space, time felt different. Slow. Gentle. Meaningful. No one spoke for several moments. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some truths don't need words. Finally, Thomas leaned against the bench, looking at Scout. "He never forgets," he whispered. "And neither should we." Scout lifted his head, eyes calm, knowing. The patrol officers smiled faintly. The town around them was beginning to remember, to heal, and to connect. The sunlight grew stronger. Birds called more freely. Children laughed in the distance. And Scout, once a guide to memory, now became a guide to the future. Daniel stood, brushing his hands along Scout's back. "Let's keep walking," he said softly. Scout rose immediately, tail sweeping, ready. Together, they moved down the park path. Not just officers and a dog. Not just a family member and a friend. But a living bridge between past and present. And as they disappeared along the tree-lined path, the town felt the quiet truth settle in. Some bonds never truly leave us. They simply wait for someone willing to notice, follow, and carry them forward. Scout glanced back one final time. Eyes steady. Purpose fulfilled. But still ready. And the warmth of that connection lingered in the air, in the park, in the town, in every quiet heart that had witnessed it. The legacy continued. Not lost. Not forgotten. Alive.